Hello, cosmonauts. Today, we are going to be exploring what Reddit asked hospital workers of Reddit. What is the strangest or most unexplainable thing you have seen a person experience when they are close to death? Answer 1 saw a lot of examples of patients who seemed to pick their time of death. For example, one family insisted on Dad GPA not dying alone. A dozen family members hanging around him in his room 24/7 for days. They turned around and were talking to each other in the doorway of his room, and he died while their backs were turned. That's what he wanted. Answer 2, I work in pre-hospital emergency care, and one day I went to this elderly woman in a nursing home. The reason we were called was because the staff thought she was having seizures. When I walked into her room, I was greeted with a lovely woman sat upright in her chair, looking very well. Throughout my assessment, she was laughing and joking with me, and her observations came back normal. She asked for a cup of tea and sent her daughter out the room to get it, and then she turned to me, I was sat beside her, and said, "Remember, I have a DNR," and I reassured her that I had seen it. She then leaned over to me and tapped me gently on my hand and said, "Well, whatever you do, dear, don't bring me back," and proceeded to die. It was like she had her finger on the off switch and decided to flick it. I've never seen a person go so calmly into death. Answer 3. I worked as a CNA at a nursing home while I was in college. Strangest thing I experienced was a healthy elderly client asking what time her daughter was scheduled to visit. I told her 4:30, and she asked me to call her daughter because she was going home at 3:53. It was strange because the time was so specific, and as I said, she was healthy. No reason to suspect she would die. I did as I was asked, and her daughter showed up. The woman had a heart attack with her daughter in the room. The official time of death was 3:55. As everyone knows, it takes a couple minutes for the doctor to pronounce a patient dead. Answer 4. My mom died of COPD. She was in the ICU, hooked up to a ventilator, in and out of consciousness, and on very heavy pain medication. She was strapped to the bed at one point because she kept trying to pull her IVs and tubes out. I was in the room with my sister and aunt, her sister, and we were talking about my dad. My mom stirred a bit, came to for a moment, and with what little energy she had, lifted her middle finger in the air. It was no secret that they didn't like each other, but this one little thing made everyone laugh, and it's still something I think back on over a decade later. She passed away later when we turned off life support. Answer 5. Sick children can be the most disturbing and yet peaceful to lose. I've also seen where a child's imaginary friend told the child to tell the parents something no child would say the way it was said. Mommy imaginary says to tell you it's not allergies, it's growing in my head, and I'm not going to be okay, but you and daddy will be. Kid was apparently at home and considered healthy, but with a sinus headache when the child did this. Freaked out mom. Enough she brought her to urgent care. Neuroblastoma found. Answer 6. Not a doctor or a nurse. One of my uncles had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He was a tough guy and didn't trust hospitals, so he didn't see a doctor until it was way too late, despite being in debilitating pain. When he did, the prognosis was grim. He had maybe 6 weeks left, and pancreatic cancer is a painful way to die. He decided to get MA'd instead. Medical assistance in dying, which is legal in Canada. On the day we were all gathered around his bed, all the paperwork and permissions were sorted out, and the syringe of drugs was connected to his IV. He was heavily sedated, but he has to be the one to push the plunger, which he did with the help of his wife. He closed his eyes and his breathing got very shallow and slowed down. After a few minutes, we thought he had passed. We were all standing around him, some saying goodbye. A lot of people were crying. About 10 minutes passed and people started to leave when suddenly, in a strong, clear voice, he said, "Russell, wait for me." He weakly raised his hand, then his breath rattled once, and he was gone. Nobody knew who Russell was, and it was kind of a mystery we talked about from time to time at family gatherings, trying to guess who he was. Years later, his wife passed, and when his kids were going through her things, they found a very old photograph of him when he was maybe 5 years old. He was in a sandbox with a small dog. On the back of the picture in faded ink it read, "Russell, 1944. The thought that our pets that have gone before us meet us to help us cross over fills me with comfort. I hope it isn't just a mind trying to make sense of a crazy time. I hope my Casey and Finnegan are waiting for me." Answer 7. I'm not in the medical field, but my grandpa flew to see his sister after she had a terrible accident in a nursing home and wasn't expected to recover. My uncle and aunt took him to say his final goodbye, and they heard him say he would see her again soon. When they returned home, we were all waiting for the call that she had passed. The call that came was that my grandpa had gotten home from the airport, thanked my aunt and uncle for taking him, and had gone to his room to lay down for a nap. He passed in his sleep and was found by his daughter when she biked to his house to chat about his visit. I'll never forget my dad, his son, answering the phone and saying he was gone. My dad hung up the phone and it rang again. This time it was his cousin calling to say my grandpa's sister had passed. As far as we could figure out, they died within a few hours of each other. Answer 8. Obligatory. Not a hospice, hospital worker, but I did 30 years as a first responder. I have no idea how many folks died with me as I tried to offer peace comfort. For real, I have no idea. Young men clutching my hand after shootings, the countless people on their last breaths after auto accidents. I can't even begin to account for them all, but here's the deal. You get pretty emotionally immune to watching folks die. You just do. But to this day, I can recall the names and faces of every child that died in my arms. It's a goddamn nightmare. And please note, I'm not religious. I'm not a warm guy. I'm in my mid-50s and still don't have children of my own. But holy shit, the innocent kids still haunt me. My last month of work, we got an innocuous call of a child that fell down in a parking lot. It was 200 yards away from our station. A car was flying around too fast in the parking lot and clipped her. I arrived on foot, and a sweet 10-year-old girl was crying as she lay in the street. I got down and held her hand. She was in tears and excruciating pain. She looked in my eyes and told me, "I'm scared because I'm dying." I held her hand tight and promised her she'd be all right. She was so scared. Within 10 or so minutes, we finally got an ambulance to rush her to ER. She died later that evening. And all the fucking shootings, stabbing, overdoses, and homicides, and they mean almost nothing to me. But all these years later, and I still see that little girl's face in my dreams. She was in so much pain. She was so scared. And now, I'm checking back out. This life was never supposed to be easy. I get it. I do. But if there's a God, he's got a lot of apologizing to do. Answer 9. I worked as a clerk on an otolaryngology unit for a few months when I was in college. For some reason, when people were about to die, many of them, even if they hadn't been mobile in some time, would get up and walk up the hallway as if they were trying to get away. The first time it happened, a woman who had been nonverbal for days and hadn't eaten in that time came walking up to me at the desk in the middle of the night and asked me where would be a good place to get a burger in town. It was very weird. Answer 10. Not in the medical field, but something my father-in-law said as he was actively dying has stayed with me all these years. In one of his very last lucid moments, drifting between life and death, he very clearly asked, "The brain, the heart, what's it all for?" I figure his body knew he was about to die and his mind was racing, trying to reconcile that imminent experience with something he'd know in his heart or brain, but not finding anything familiar because it was the first time ever that he was dying. And also the last time. It was eerie but very human. I'll always remember that. Answer 11. I worked night shift in an inpatient unit. A lady died the night before. She had been on the unit for a while. Family had photos of her dressed up placed around the room. She was a singer, and some of the photos were of her wearing a black dress and a big black hat. The new patient that was admitted to that room during the day wasn't able to sleep at night during my shift. I asked her if anything was wrong. She said a lady in a long black dress and big black hat kept singing and it was keeping her awake. That was 20 years ago and it still gives me chills. Some woman snore. My wife did her nursing training at St. Thomas's Hospital in London, and there were tales of ghost nurses and the like. Supposedly, a nurse had made some sort of terrible mistake, and a child had died, and she was so consumed with guilt that she killed herself in the hospital grounds. She was rumored to appear at the bedside if a nurse was about to make a mistake and would make her presence known to make the nurse think about what they were about to do. She was rarely seen, but when she was in a gray uniform, a color not worn for many years. My wife never saw her, but she was told on an early shift one time that someone on the ward had died in the night. Not unusual in itself, but apparently he'd told the nurses seconds before he died that the gray nurse with no feet had just visited him and told him everything would be all right. He had been disturbed by the thought of death, but died happy, so they said. The no feet thing puzzled everyone until someone pointed out that the floor in that wing was higher than it used to be due to renovations. So anyone walking on the original Victorian stone floor would have been 8 inches or so lower. Answer 12. Not in the medical field, but my mom was in palliative care with cancer. She had a lot of anxiety surrounding dying and rarely addressed it head-on. But one day in late April, as I sat beside her bed in the hospital, she told me she thought that she was going to die that day. I was at a loss for words when she suddenly asked me the date, and I told her April 28th. She remarked how it was her estranged daughter's, my estranged older sister's birthday, and that it wouldn't be very nice for my sister to have to share her birthday with her, my mom's death day. She didn't mention anything more of it or about dying on any specific day. She passed exactly 1 month later on May 28th, and in typing this, I realized that today is also my sister's birthday. Strange. Hey you, if you enjoying the video, subscribe for more histories. Answer 13. During a night shift, we had a very sick gentleman with extensive stage 4 lung cancer. Not for any EMET calls or CPR, but for end-of-life care if he deteriorated further. And was in a really bad way, early-ish. In the night, we attended to him after we heard him faintly calling out, "Help me, help me." Gave him some morphine too because he was clearly uncomfortable. We checked him again 1 hour later, still breathing, looking relaxed, resting in bed. The second hourly check I come back, and I find his bed is raised to its maximum height. and he has passed looking deathly gray and is no longer breathing. My colleague is equally surprised at the bed situation because he hadn't touched it. We both figured perhaps in a delirium the patient had messed around with his bed controller, perhaps trying to signal for help or something, mistaking it for the nursing call bell. After the doctor finally certifies the death and contacts the family, we move the patient out of his room and into our treatment room so we can prep him for the morgue and place him into a body bag. My colleague and I had lowered the bed and put it at a safe height for our backs so we could roll and clean him safely. I shit you not, the moment we had finished wrapping him and had stepped back, the bed starts making a whirring noise and starts rising up again. I can see my colleague's hands, and he can see mine, and neither of us have our hands anywhere near the bed controller. We both just shot each other a WTF look, most likely just a problem with the bed's electrics, but to have it happen, particularly after we had finished and not just during the procedure, was a real X-Files moment for me. Answer 14. As a hospice volunteer, we have a duty of confidentiality and a commitment to keep those sacred last moments of life private. However, we can certainly talk about things more generally. Sometimes people get visits from loved ones or groups of people. I have had people tell me that someone is coming to get them soon, or that a taxi is waiting for them, and shortly after they die. I have seen people who are bedridden for weeks suddenly try to get out of bed. When this happens, I'm usually not surprised if they die soon after. They know they are leaving. I hope this is comforting to people. Answer 15. This is a weird one to me. My Phil was home hospice. All the family were around him, about 15 people crammed in the bedroom. My husband was playing the guitar, all his father's favorite songs. I noticed my youngest, about 8, just staring above Phil's head. Phil didn't pass until the next morning, but when I asked my son what he was looking at, he said 2 really tall angels standing on either side of Pappy. He said the angels didn't look at anyone else but him. He said they were waiting for him. When I've asked him about it after, he doesn't remember anything about it. Answer 16. Patient had post-polio syndrome, bedbound, on oxygen but stable and 100% oriented. I came to visit him and he was so excited to tell me he saw his wife. He told me she was standing in the doorway of his room motioning for him to follow her, but he couldn't get up. He kind of laughed and said it sounds crazy but was certain she was there. I told his daughter and warned her that sometimes it means the time is close. She brushed it off, saying their anniversary was tomorrow, so she's probably on his mind. I went to check on him early the next day. He was gone. His wife seemingly came and got him for their anniversary. I had a lady who was actively dying. Terminal secretions causing very audible breathing, the death rattle. She was alone and her son couldn't be there. He asked me to stay with her until she passed. Eventually, her apnea starts lasting longer and longer, until it's been 5 to 10 minutes since she's taken a breath. I take out my stethoscope to listen for a heartbeat. I'm listening and can't hear a thing. She looks deceased. Just as I'm about to call Todd, she sits up and screams, "No!" with a secretion-filled inhale. Then collapsed back in the bed and start the Cheney-Stokes breathing pattern. About 20 minutes after that, she died for real. Scared the shit out of me. Had another patient who lived alone. She was stable but terminal. As I was leaving her home, I told her I'd see her tomorrow. She hollered as I left, "No, you won't," with a chuckle. Gallows humor due to her illness being terminal is how I took it. I got a message that morning that she passed away in her sleep. Somehow, maybe she knew. Answer 17. Not in any of those fields, but before my grandmother passed, she'd constantly see someone standing in the hallway calling her name. She would assume it was me and call me. I was staying at my grandparents to take care of them in their final moments and my mom who is disabled. I'd always come and had to prove no one was there and I hadn't come out. As for my grandfather, he would keep seeing cats, which he hated cats. It actually would happen so frequently right before something serious happened for hospitalization, I started using it as a sign to check his vitals. It was usually his oxygen dropping into the low 80s percentile in his blood from COPD. He used to work in uranium mines. I make sense though, oxygen deprivation leading to hallucinations. His final week, he had an unusual amount of happiness and energy, actually getting up to play Counter-Strike and with his RC tanks. When I noticed that, I knew it was the last wind. You just kind of get that feeling of, oh no, this isn't normal. They're too happy for no reason. Answer 18. Hospice nurse for a few years. Multiple times I've had patients tell me they hear bells before they pass. I'm talking 4 to 5 times in 2 years. The final one seemed like he could probably stick around for a while. He told me he heard the wedding bells, that they sounded beautiful, and he was excited. He passed that night. I've had patients get uncharacteristically clear-headed hours before they die and thank me for being kind. It was not a rally. They didn't get a bunch of energy or seem any healthier, just unexpected displays of gratitude right before passing. I'm going to preface these last two with, I don't believe in the paranormal. normal. I just genuinely can't explain this, or maybe I don't want to think about it enough to find a reason. I had a patient pass while I was in the room. She wasn't my favorite patient. Honestly, she was pretty hostile, and me and her never really developed a rapport. I pulled her lines, shut her eyes, put her body in a more comfortable position. I usually say something small when I'm done. Hers was maybe, "I hope you were comfortable. I hope the transition is easy." I shit you the fuck not, the light above her head turned off. Maybe 5 seconds or so. Then the light in the middle of the room turned off. Similar amount of time, but the light above her head had turned back on. Then both of those lights were on, but the light above the door turned off. I was pale. I just can't really explain what that would even be. Had another lady jerk up in bed when my back was turned. Had a CNA in the room with me. She looked at us and started speaking in a deep voice, like a voice I wouldn't expect a granny to even be able to speak in. Said some weird bullshit like, "You think you can just do whatever you want," and started laughing. I whipped around and the CNA about had a panic attack. The old lady just started talking normally again. I asked if that was her, and she just gave a light laugh. She was fine the rest of the night, super sweet, past near the morning. There's probably an explanation for the last two, but it's still just creepy as hell, man. Answer: 19 woman. Not a hospice hospital worker, but do have something to add to this. My mom had a massive stroke in front of me. She was still talking for a bit, and she turned to me and said, "The C sisters." I was very confused and said, "Yeah, the C sisters, I'm sure they are fine." Luckily enough, I managed to tell her I loved her, and she told me she loved me. She passed 5 days later. When I mentioned to my aunt that mom had said the C sisters when having the stroke, she was shocked. She told me that the C sisters were cousins of their mothers who took care of their mother on her deathbed. When my grandmother died, they were there and took care of the whole situation. I don't know if she saw them during the stroke. I don't know what exactly happened, but I like to think that she was at peace and being taken care of. Answer 20. When my dad's grandfather was nearing the end, my dad and his mom were at Gramps' bedside. Gramps was a stubborn old man about pretty much everything. He'd been declining steadily for a few days at this point, and my dad eventually took his hand and said, "You know, it's okay to let go and die. We'll be okay." He and my grandmother both say that Gramps opened his eyes one last time, took a final breath, and passed. My dad swears it's the only time Gramps ever listened to anything anyone said to him. Oddly enough, my grandmother, Gramps' daughter, had a similar passing. She went into hospice on Christmas Eve with the nurse saying we could expect maybe 48 hours. She hung on nearly 2 more weeks. It was heartbreaking for all of us because she really wasn't there anymore. One of the hospice workers finally asked if it was possible if she was waiting for someone to say goodbye. My grandmother helped raise my cousin, who is now semi-estranged from the rest of the family. Even if the cousin had shown up to say goodbye, I don't think my grandfather would have let them in. So my mom went to my grandmother's bedside and told her that my cousin was not going to come and that she was going to have to let that relationship heal after death rather than before it. My grandmother passed that afternoon. It was like she just needed to know for sure that she wasn't going to miss that goodbye. Answer 21. Not me, but my mom. She was working in a nursing home for the elderly at the time. She was making rounds and walked into a lady patient room with her, the patient, shouting, "Get out of here," at the corner of her room. The lady patient asked Mom, "Is she sees him?" Mom asks, "Who?" The lady replies, "The man over there," pointing to the empty corner. There was no one in the room besides the two of them. Mom asked if the man was wearing a blue suit, to which the patient replied that he was. Mom said she'd be right back and was going to make some phone calls to the patient's daughter, who was in another part of the state. After some back and forth, the patient's daughter agrees to come visit her mom. My mom finishes her rounds by the time the daughter comes. The daughter visits until visiting hours are over and books a hotel room for the night. The lady patient passed away that night. Now, there was an incident prior to this when her own sister passed away. The sister was the youngest of the 3 siblings. Since then, my mom is convinced the Grim Reaper wears a blue suit. Answer 22. Not a hospice nor hospital worker, but I had a near-death experience I'd like to share. I used to be heavily into powered substances as a late teen early adult and had an overdose. During this overdose, I had a classic near-death experience where I saw dead loved ones and dead pets, and they'd be telling me that I need to change my ways and get off the drugs because my life hasn't been fulfilled yet, etc. I woke up in the hospital and the nurse team ran in like, "OMG, you're awake." One of the nurses said to me, as I was discharged from the hospital, that the night shift nurses would sit next to me and say that I needed to change my ways because my life wasn't fulfilled yet. I never looked back, and now I'm 5 years completely sober. Answer 23. I am not a hospice nurse, but I was close with one. She left hospice after an experience with a terminal cancer patient. The patient had kids and a husband, and they were part of an extreme Christian group. The group did faith healing and came in to heal the patient at home, lifted her up and down several times and essentially broke all the bones in her body because cancer had weakened them. Hospice nurses were horrified. Not long after the patient passed, my friend was called in, but she noticed the patient's body was just left unattended in a corner, and husband seemed irritated. My friend asked him if he was okay, and he said she was weak. She wouldn't have died if she really had faith in God. And he implied his wife was going to hell in front of their little kids. My friend is Christian. She and the other hospice nurses got together and confronted the leader of the faith healing group and ripped him a new one for teaching his followers such awful beliefs. But she couldn't get over it. Hey you, subscribe for more histories. Answer 24. When my grandfather came home on hospice, the prostate cancer eventually metastasized into his bone marrow. I was the closest grandchild, both geographically and in terms of my relationship with my gramps, and I helped my grandmother do the heavy lifting for the last several weeks of his life. I remember the last night he was alive. He was incredibly restless and kept throwing his blankets off, what I now know to be signs of death approaching. And at one point, he looked at me, reached his skeletal hand out and croaked, "Help me." Now, my grandpa had retired from the Navy as a CW-04 after 34 years in the service. He was a deeply proud and stubborn man, and at this point, his body had deteriorated to the point that he was literally skin and bones. He looked like the Holocaust survivors that were liberated from the camps. He had literally wasted away. Meanwhile, my grandpa had confessed to me many months prior that he hoped he'd die before he had to rely on people to take care of him exactly as I was doing then, changing, bathing, spoon-feeding, etc. And when he begged for me to help him, I looked at him in his desperation and suffering and hollowly replied, "I'm sorry, I can't. I don't know how." My heart still aches 10+ years later when I remember the profound sense of helplessness I felt in that moment. I'm not a religious person. Hell, I don't even know if I believe in God. But that night, as I drove back to my apartment to grab supplies before returning to my grandparents' house, I prayed that it would be over. I wept as I drove and beseeched whatever higher power an aching heart calls out to. I remember saying aloud, "It's enough, please. This is enough. Just let it be over. Please, just let it be over." My apartment was only 20 minutes away, but just as I was pulling into the parking lot, my cell phone rang. It was my grandmother calling to tell me that my grandfather had just died. Answer 25. Once had a lady who was leaving that morning to go home on hospice. Zero issues all shift. My tech and I had to 2-to-1 assist another patient. We were in that room maybe 20 minutes. Came out and the lady had passed. I had literally just taken her to the bathroom and had a whole convo getting her comfortable in bed right before helping the other patient. Had another guy, was supposed to discharge, but his home health got delayed and he was visibly upset about staying another night. Ended up having a spontaneous lower GI bleed start about 2 hours later. He went from bad to worse very quick. They were trying to argue the ICU transfer to the point the rapid nurse had to insist them he could not stay on our floor. I was told the next evening when I was back that he died in the early morning. I will never forget him telling me he was kind of scared before they took him to the ICU. Answer 26. A woman walked into the emergency room, looked at me and said very calmly, "Hello, I'm going to die." She seemed fairly stable at triage, but the moment she was taken back to a room, she started to deteriorate rapidly. She had a large internal bleed and was rushed to surgery. I don't actually know if she died. Often in emergency medicine, you don't find out the outcome. Lots of unfinished stories. However, her condition was extremely unstable and serious, and I suspect she did die. Many healthcare workers will tell you if someone calmly advises you that they are about to die, believe them. They probably are. Answer 27. My brother was in hospital for edema in his leg when he had a massive heart attack and had to have CPR resuscitation. The doctor said the damage to his heart was so severe he would die at any time, and there was nothing they could do. Now, my brother had never been religious, nor had he ever believed in ghosts or any of that sort of thing. Before he closed his eyes for the last time, he looked past me and said, "Hiya, love." He then said, "Nikki is here. She's waiting. I'm gonna go with her now. Look after the kids." I promised him I would, and he closed his eyes. He died about an hour later. Nikki was his wife, who died of cancer 12 months before, and who he had spent 24 hours a day for 3 years caring for before she died. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or souls or anything, but that had me wondering, hallucination? Answer 28. My Nana died like 35 years ago. It was the time of no ability to EFTPOs or pay ID for trains or buses, etc. I was young and had no money until payday. My mom phoned me and told me the news. She couldn't buy me a ticket from a different city. My stepdad, Nana's son, a prick, would not let mom come get me a 4-hour return trip. So I was upset, but understood. A mate took me to a rugby union game. I looked down and found $20 in that era that was 100 today. I picked it up, went to the train, got a ticket, and went, "Yo, her funeral," and then went home. I believe Nana put that money there. Answer 29. My father was passing away in the hospital. He had slipped into a coma and didn't have much time. The whole family had gathered to his room and we were all sitting around him, playing his favorite music and talking about life. My sister-in-law was there with my 2-year-old nephew, and after being there for a couple of hours, decided to take him away for a nap. As she was leaving, she stood in the doorway saying goodbye to everyone, and my nephew started staring at an area on the wall above my dad. He began to smile and wave. We all just kind of watched, a bit freaked out actually, LOL. Dad passed about a half an hour after that.
That was enough for today, cosmonaut. I'll wait for you in the next travel.